Hey there, it's Darren. Welcome to the next episode in the story, episode 5. We're on chapter 4, and this one is called The Dad. So, the first story that I want to tell you about my dad is one that I think sort of just sums him up in a nutshell. I was probably about, 12 or 13 when this happened. We lived in the middle of nowhere, as you've heard in the previous chapters, and we were on our way to town, and it was my dad, my sister, and myself, the three of us. And my dad had this van that should be in, like a movie, maybe Uncle Buck, if you've seen it, where he has this ridiculous car. Okay, so that was this van. It was a green Ford Aerostar van, the short version. And I don't know what year it was. And the back sliding door, it didn't work. It didn't work, didn't open or close. So whenever we sat in the back seat, you had to crawl through the front passenger or driver's seat and then crawl, through the seats behind. And it was just disgusting. It was this car. So we're in the van. We're on our way to town. And there's we call them bums. There was a bum walking down the road. And you could tell he needed a ride. So my dad kind of zooms by and just slams on the brakes. And by the way, this happened often. And put it in reverse. And so here we are. And my dad rolls us down the window. Get in. Where are you going? And going to town. So I was sitting up front, and I have to climb through the back to, and we're on the side of the road. So I climbed the back of the van, sitting with Danielle. This guy gets in, and he's got a bag and whatever. He puts it kind of at his feet. And he closes his door, and he goes, thanks. And my dad goes, yeah, you're welcome. And then just like that, he's like, and he doesn't hit the bum. And my dad's a huge guy. Don't try anything. And then the bum yelled. He's like, scared to death. And we gave him a ride to town. That's a story that really sums up my dad. My dad is a character. He is someone that whenever I talk about him, and my brother's the same, or my sister, we talk in this certain voice, it's just, that's my dad. He's an absolute character. And everyone calls him Danny. He's probably one of the only people in my story that I'm going to just completely name. My dad's name is Dan, but everyone calls him Danny. He was born and raised in Bend, Oregon. He's the baby. He has 2 older brothers and had wonderful parents. My grandparents were just phenomenal people and good parents. So he grew up in a very loving home. And bless my grandma's heart, she had these boys 1 year right after the other. They're just 3, 2, 1 were their ages. It was crazy. So my dad, right from the get-go, from a kid living in Bend, Oregon, was just this crazy kid. All 3 of them were. There's all kinds of stories that I've been told my entire life about how crazy the boys were growing up. My grandpa was a mechanic, amongst many other things, and there was just always cars around. And the boys would just go out and take apart a whole car for fun and put it back together, and just always getting in trouble on the farm, around in the shops, things like that. One of my favorite stories about my dad as a kid that I've heard is that they were playing with big rocks, and they figured out that you could throw big rocks onto spray cans of paint and watch them explode. So I guess my dad did this and dropped a big old rock on this spray paint can full of black paint and just exploded all over him. And they said that it was in his ears. My grandpa was rubbing him with paint thinner to try to get it off. These are just they're ridiculous stories, and they go on and on and on, and there are so many of them. So all these crazy stories about my dad's childhood that I've grown up with, and just stories about my dad in general are as crazy. They've just always had this element of oh my word, who would ever do that? He loves his toys, snowmobiles, 4-wheelers, motorcycles, dirt bikes, jet skis, like you name it, my dad has it. His love in life is like adventure. Let's go fast. He's a total daredevil. You don't ever want to ride with him. He's scared every person that's ever rode with him. And he has these crazy ideas. So I mentioned in one of my earlier chapters that we used to sled around on an old car hood. Well, that's my dad. So he took the hood off of the Chevy Chevelle, just flipped it over and got some whatever. I don't know what we tied it onto the back of the Chevelle with. And he would just, drag us around the neighborhood on this car hood behind the Chevelle. And just these crazy stories. That's my dad. And, nothing stops him. So he needed to, I don't remember the exact scenario, but he basically needed to move his shop from town to the house. Like he couldn't be in the space he was at anymore. So he's like, well, I'm just going to take apart the shop and I'll just move it to my house. Y'all, it was like a 30 by 40 shop or something, like 2 stories. Like it's probably bigger than that. I don't know exactly how big it is. This huge shop. And we dismantled it like piece by piece, the whole thing. And it went on a trailer and we trucked it the 15 miles up to his house and he just put it back together. Like he just does whatever he wants. There's nothing that stops him. So his whole life, he was known as this sort of mischief maker and kind of this little menace. And he's crude. He just says what he thinks. He's funny, but it never stops with my dad. And almost everyone in his life, especially family, cousins, aunts, uncles, all of them, they just say, oh, that's just Danny. Oh, that's just your dad. That's just Danny. He's always excused. Like anyone else that did some of these outlandish things that my dad does, I don't know what would happen to them. And you'll never find out because no one does them. But my dad does, and everyone's just like, oh, that's just Danny. So that's my dad in a nutshell. He's always kind of living on the edge, creating a little trouble, saying whatever he wants, and for some reason, people are just always like, oh, that's just Danny. So, but on top of that, there's another thing, and that's this. My dad is actually completely brilliant, and I really mean that. His mind works in a way that I can't even begin to explain. He is talented and he can do anything. He can fix anything, build anything, repair anything. He is a welder. He also is a fabricator and a machinist. And he has worked on projects that are super little intricate things all the way to building huge rigs and tanks for the Forest Service and just ridiculously huge projects that the average person would typically not work on. It would take a small team, but that's just my dad. He's also a total mathematician. From a young age, you could just be like, Dad, what's 348 times 720? And he'll just give you the answer. It's just crazy how his mind works. He is always thinking. He can recreate anything. I remember this guy came to him once at the machine shop, and he's like, hey, I got this gear, and I just need you to make another one. And my dad just looks at it, traces it, and then machines another one to the, I'm going to use the wrong word here, to the millimeter, to the whatever little, it's literally exactly the same. And he does this all the time. He does it, if you will, without thinking. He is just naturally brilliant. And his mind works in a very special way. In 6th and 7th grade, I remember in 6th grade, I had this project where I needed to make a pyramid. We were studying Egypt and whatnot. So all these kids are making, I don't know, cardboard pyramids, whatever. Oh no, not Darren. Darren's dad, and he welded this amazing mini replica of Egypt that was to scale. And my dad just welded it all on this huge steel plate thing. And then he we gold painted it, and it had all the blue for the river. And it was just everyone got to school and there's cardboard and paper or whatever, and Darren brings in this metal, like, it's still at my dad's house. In 7th grade, it was castle year, and everyone's, using paper roll towels and toilet paper rolls, whatever, to build these castles. And Darren had to, like, wagon his castle in because Dad had built this ridiculous, like, 2-foot by 2-foot metal gargantuan castle, and we had, like, spray painted it white, and it was just, that was my dad. Always a huge, big everything. He's a big guy. He's like 6'6", weighs close to 400 pounds. Big man, does big things, big person overall. And that's just my dad. But I remember at a certain point that, I think it was about when I was a teenager, I didn't always love that he was so big and just said whatever he wanted. He was pretty crude, really crude actually. He would just say whatever came to his mind, whether it was appropriate or inappropriate. And, it was kind of hard. And after a certain point, to me, it wasn't funny anymore. Everyone around us in our life was still like, oh, that's just Danny. Oh, that's just your dad. And I just, that was hard for me because he didn't seem to care too much about what other people thought in my world. He just did what he wanted. Like, nothing else mattered. No one mattered. Like, I'm just going to do what I want. And I just didn't think that he was very considerate. I would share things with him, and he would just respond with how he saw it. He wasn't the best listener growing up. An amazing guy doing amazing things, but he was just always like, wow, here I am. And I didn't love that. It kind of made me angry, in fact. I did end up, it was just my dad and I for a while in my childhood. And like just he and I living together. And I do remember that that just made us so close. And some of my happiest memories with my dad are from that period of time in my life. I remember it was St. Patrick's Day coming up, and everyone had, corned beef and cabbage. And I was like, I want corned beef and cabbage too. So, Dad gave me some money, or we went to the store or whatever, and we bought it. I made it. I think it was 14. And when it was done, like, we just took it out of the pot, and we cut it in half, and I ate half of this corned beef, and so did he. And it was just those simple little things that were so special to me. There were no rules, it seemed like. And I was in a boy choir, and we took a big trip to Boston one year, and I remember that my dad chaperoned, and it was just so fun for me to kind of share my dad with the whole group, because he's a fun guy. He's funny, and he's just talented. He's very kind and always wants to talk to people. He's fun to be around. But like I said, he was so big, and it would make me kind of mad, and I would be embarrassed sometimes. But the thing about my dad is that, and he's much better at it now, he wasn't too good at dealing with his emotions. And there were times when his anger was definitely taken out the wrong way. He'd get mad and just like pop you on the head, or he'd get mad and throw something at you, or he'd get mad and just like cuss you out. And it was really hard to endure as a kid, because he was fun, and he was this big personality that everyone loved, but he would lose his temper. And I'm sure that there were times as kids when, we probably drove him crazy and, I don't know, needed to be corrected. But he was just, he didn't deal with his emotions very well. I've been hit, I've been slapped, I've been thrown at. It was a lot. And unfortunately, one time his anger was so misdirected that we ended up going to live with someone else for a while. And that was a very difficult time in our life. And for a long time, I was just so angry that if I looked back on it, like, why is this happening? What is this? I couldn't understand why he was so inconsiderate. He was giving, he was compassionate, he was very lovable, but he just at times was not considerate. And for me, to be considerate, sometimes when I need to just go back to sort of a basic understanding or a blank slate or a definition of something, I like to just open up the dictionary. And I did that here. To be considerate means that you are careful not to cause inconvenience or hurt to others. And it just seemed that so much hurt had been caused and that he just didn't care too much about that. So that's how I felt for a really long time, and it really started driving a wedge into our relationship. And I sort of naturally just started distancing myself from my dad. I even at one point, I admit, kind of attempted to replace my dad with somebody, with my youth minister, in fact. I felt more connected to my youth minister than I did my dad. We had sort of a rocky relationship for quite some time. A lot of fights, a lot of anger, a lot of things that I was bitter about. And it wasn't until June 2012 that we had this moment, and Dad finally kind of questioned why I was so distant from him. He felt like I didn't love him, and he kind of knew I didn't want to be around him. I just wasn't around him much. I found every excuse to be anywhere else. And I finally told him the truth that day in June 2012. I was on the phone, and I finally told my dad something that I had played in my mind over and over and over for years. And I just said, Dad, I'm gay. And he was silent, just silent. And to this day, it's the longest period of silence we've ever shared. And then finally, and it just makes me tear up, he said something that I will never forget. And he said, well, son, all I know is that God doesn't make mistakes. So if you're gay, I guess you're gay. Ever since I had been a teenager, I just wanted my dad to consider me. I knew that he was smart, and I knew that he had to have known that I was not a normal heterosexual boy, but I just always felt that he had ignored that and had tried to push other things onto me. He did not consider me. And it wasn't until I heard my dad say those words, if you're gay, I guess you're gay, that I finally felt that Dad had actually heard me and considered my words and my feelings. And for the first time, I started to consider him too. And I had not done that, looking back. I had just been mad. See, I believe that everyone has a story. Everyone has a background, and my dad is no exception. So having that conversation with him absolutely changed my life in very dramatic ways. Not only because since that time has he worked diligently to make me feel loved and accepted for the exact person that I am, but also because it broke new ground in our relationship. And it helped us both to realize that we could experience really clear communication with each other. And nothing was held back anymore. Since then, I have had the confidence and the courage to ask my dad some really tough questions. Why did you do what you did to us as kids? What were you thinking? What were you going through at the time that led you to do this or say this? And what was your intent in doing some of this stuff? So when you learn somebody's story and that you consider where they're coming from, you can then begin understanding and explaining to yourself what's actually happening. So I just would start running through some open-ended questions. Instead of just being mad and angry at my dad, I would say, to myself, why did he do that? What made him do that? Where is he coming from? What have they got in their storybook that is kind of leading to this? So I don't say any of this to say that somebody's background should ever be used to sort of justify their behavior and excuse their actions, things like that. Because, there's a time and a place for that. I feel like that's actually a different conversation. What I'm saying is that understanding that they have a background and a story helps you towards creating a new story with them, if you want. And there are just too many things about my dad that I love and appreciate and respect to just let go, to keep being angry. So, my dad did some things when we were younger that they sucked. They were awful. And really, really damn hard to endure. But I know now that I don't need to hold on to those memories, the bad ones, the sad ones, because they don't get me anywhere. And after a lot of communication, I know that he's not proud of them either. He's not proud of them at all. We have talked, we have shared, we have laughed, we've cried, we've apologized, we've forgiven, and we have moved on. And we do it every day. We continue to work towards a beautiful relationship together, father and son. My dad has this tremendous gift. And actually, he has so many. But one of his greatest gifts is this. He knows when he's wrong, and he knows how to say he's sorry. And he has. And it felt so good. It's felt so good to get really clear with my dad and to be able to move on and have a great relationship today. I have boundaries, and he's got some boundaries too. But of all of the, out of everything, I think that my dad's greatest gift is still that he's just unapologetically himself. And he does know when he's wrong and if he's messed up or gone too far, and he will apologize. He will ask for forgiveness, and he will make it right. And it makes him a phenomenal person. Today, my dad is still up to the craziest shenanigans you've ever heard of. You'd think that they're just made up, and it's just like, no, that's just my dad. What I love the most about him, again, is that he doesn't care what people think. Now, sometimes that's a bad thing, and sometimes, most of the time, it's actually a really good thing. He does what he wants. He does the things that make him feel fulfilled and good. He says what he wants. He speaks his mind. You always know what my dad thinks. And, sometimes he absolutely crosses that line of confidence and arrogance. And sometimes, he's a very confident person. Every once in a while, he does veer a little too much into the, I'm an arrogant person today. But what's amazing is that you just have a conversation with him. And you say, no, why are you doing that? What's going on? And he'll say, I'm sorry, or, oh, I didn't mean that. And really, he just kind of goes right back to being his confident self. We can always have a conversation about it. And I'm so thankful for that. My dad has taught me to be honest. He's taught me to work really hard. He's taught me to use my mind, use my brain. I've got one. We all do. And my dad uses his. It's really a lot of people, y'all, that don't use their mind. My dad uses his mind, and I'm so thankful that he instilled that in me. He's also taught me that karma is real. What goes around comes around. He's taught me to face my problems head on. Don't go around the bump, go over it, is what he always says. So, my dad is a character. And sometimes it does not seem that he can really be as Danny as he is, but he is. And you know what? I love him for it. So that is my chapter called The Dad. Thank you so much for watching, and I will look forward to sharing the next chapter with you, and it's called The Sister. Have a good day, and we'll see you next week.